Greetings, everyone. This is a brief introduction to the forms and the basic meaning of the Piel binyan, or the Piel stem. The Piel is one of the more difficult stems to understand in terms of how it changes the meaning of the kal. It's not as obvious as the nifal or the hifil. And really, I think it's simpler to begin simply by learning it in the following way. Many common verbs occur exclusively or primarily in the Piel. We'll leave for another day the discussions about why that is or what possible effect it would have. But let's just take one of the most common examples, the root davar. You can see the word for word there. It occurs over 1,000 times, meaning to speak, in the Piel, and it only occurs some 40 times in the kal, in the whole Bible. So here's a very common expression from the book of Leviticus, Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe, and the Lord said to Moses. And you can see a Vayiktol here. You can see the three-letter root. You can see the Yod, which means this is a Yiktol form. And you can probably already guess that that's a third-person masculine form, he said, with Adonai being the subject. And that's a good guess, and we'll see that the forms don't need to be terribly hard. So let's have a look at the prefix or imperfect forms. And I think it's easiest to compare them to a more familiar form, namely the kal. And so the kal and the prefix or imperfect, we kind of want to slice off the performatives, which are by now familiar. And we see that in the kal, the characteristic vowel under the performative is a chirik, a short I. So ektol, tiktol, tiktali, yiktol, and so on. When we come to the Piel, we have the exact same performative consonants. Aleph means I, ani, adaber. Atav represents you, and so on. And these will be consistent through all the binyanim. So what is different from the kal to the Piel? Well, we'll note a couple things. One is that, for the most part, under the performative, what you have is a shva. And the only exception is under the aleph, where you have the closest thing it can have to a shva, and that is with a patak. The second thing you'll notice is there is a doubling of the middle root letter. And finally, we'll note this patak followed by tsera vowel pattern is generally followed throughout the whole form. So here is kind of our most common form, our third person singular masculine, y-da-ber. A shva under the yod, a patak, doubling the middle radical, the middle letter of whatever root we're doing, and then a tsera, y-da-ber, he will say, he will speak. Here's the more sort of raw Platonic form. So here would be our performative letter, whether aleph or tav or nun, and then we're going to have an a and an eh. How do we make the imperative? Well, the Piel really nicely illustrates the rule that we've spoken about all year long, which is that to make the imperative, you just get rid of the performative. So let's illustrate this. First of all, if we want to give an imperative, we're only concerned with second person forms. So tadaber is you will say to a masculine speaker. Tadabri, you will say to a feminine speaker. Tadabru, you will say, y'all will say, and so on. How do we make the imperative? We're just going to lop off this performative part. And it is absolutely consistent. Nothing has to change. So tadaber becomes daber. Tadabri becomes dabri. So that would be simply to say to one person, say, tell me. And likewise for the plurals, tadabru just becomes dabru. to daberna becomes simply daberna. All right, so imperatives are a piece of cake. Let's do one other thing that involves, roughly speaking, the prefix form, and that is the vayiktol. Some people call this the consecutive preterite or the converted vav or various other names. We know that this involves this unique form of vav with a patak under it and a doubling of the next letter. So let's just bring down that special vav to our prefix form, and there we go. Vayidaber, and he said. And just to do due diligence, I will note one little wrinkle that wouldn't even bother you if I didn't point it out to you. But that is, this is the form you're usually going to see. So, vayidaber, but what are we missing? We're missing the doubling dagesh. And this is going to be typical, and there's a reason for it. It's a reason we've mentioned from time to time, which is that under certain consonants, which include the yod, if you have a shava, a vocal shava, if there is some reason that they should double, they often won't. And the mnemonic for remembering which letters this might happen under is skinum levi. And that S represents all the sibilants. Samek, Shin, Sin, Tzade, or Kuf, Nun, Mem, Lamed, Vav, and Yod. All right. We will see other examples of that in the PL system. It's not that big a deal. You probably wouldn't have noticed it. At any rate, we'll move along. Let's have a look now, not at the prefix anymore, but at the suffix, the past tense, the perfect. And one thing to note before we leave the prefix aside is that just as in the prefix, the middle root letter. So here we're working with davar, dalet, beit, resh. The middle root letter doubles all the way through. Likewise in the suffix, the middle root letter doubles all the way in every form. All right, with that said, here are the PL suffixes. So dibarti, dibarta, dibart, diber, dibra, dibarnu, and so on. And you might be thinking, holy cow, those look really easy. They're the exact same endings I'm used to with the suffix form. They are the exact same endings. You could probably have just encountered PL verb forms and not even realize they were PLs and just recognized that dibarti said means I said. Let me illustrate that with a sentence from the Bible. And then I'll tell you where we're going here. I'm going to give you two sentences to show you how easy it is to spot suffix forms. And then I'm going to point out that there is still a reason to know the difference between a PL past tense and our old-fashioned call past tense. Okay, first, the easy part where you don't even need to know the difference. Halo ze hadavar asher dibarnu. All right, which form is dibarnu? Well, anachnu, we. Dibarnu. There's the we said. So this is a sentence which says, this is our question ha. Is it not the case, or is it the case that is not this, ze, ha davar, the word, asher, which, dibarnu, is not this the word which we spoke? So you already recognize that means we spoke. We'll do one more with the same verb in the first person singular. Ka'asher dibarti el Moshe. This is God speaking. Ka'asher, just as dibarti, that's the I form, just as I said, el Moshe, just as I said to Moses. So there's a perfect. Now, again, you're asking, why did I need to learn the PL at all when, my goodness, I can almost recognize these without learning about doubling the middle radical and all that nonsense? Here would be the reason. We're messing around with this root davar which basically only occurs in the PL. But there are other roots which have different meanings in the call and in the PL. So for instance, the root lamad in the call means to learn, but in the PL means to teach. And so let me put two sentences and think for a moment about what means what. Lamadati chokmah and limadti chokmah. One of those means I taught wisdom, and one of those means I studied wisdom. Well, if all else fails, you can see the doubling of the middle letter here, and also the kirik under the first letter, the patak, limadti. This is the PL form, which means this is the one that means to teach. I taught wisdom. And lamad in the call means to learn. There are other roots that are like this, where they have one meaning in the call and a different meaning in the PL. And that's one of the reasons it's worth knowing and understanding the PL form. So in those cases, you could distinguish the meaning.